All right, Crim 20, let's knock out Chapter 7. We are going to talk about the clients of adult correctional agencies. And yes, indeed, we do call them clients. That was kind of just always the proper terminology that we used. The number of clients under adult correctional supervision has grown dramatically over the past 20 years. There also has been kind of a dramatic increase in the number of females that have been under correctional supervision in the past 20 years. Minorities make up a greater percentage of those under correctional supervision than their makeup in the United States population. This is obviously a significant issue that has existed in the United States for decades, and it continues to exist in the United States. We're in 2020 right now. When I'm recording this, I don't know how many more years I'll be using this particular recording, but 2020 has been quite the year, and the whole racial disparity thing has been discussed over and over and over, and it is clearly a significant issue, and it's very obvious in the world of corrections as well. How do we fix this problem? I wish I knew the answer to this, but it is the numbers will tell you that it is a significant problem. What types of offenders do we have? We have a lot of interesting types of offenders with different types of needs. Of course, one of the big ones would be the drug offender. There are the vast majority of people that you deal with in the world of corrections has some sort of issue with controlled substances, whether that be drugs or alcohol. The number of drug offenders in prison has declined over the past 10 years. A lot of us have heard, oh my gosh, there's so many people in prison for possession of drugs or marijuana. That's just not the case. People will say, oh, we're locking these drug offenders up, and they're not, we certainly aren't doing that in California anymore. If there's no violence involved, you're not in prison in California. But it just doesn't happen anymore. But drug offenders, we have basically had to kick them out, take them out of our prisons because we need the beds for the violent offenders. So why did we have so many drug offenders in prison? Well, there were a lot of reasons why, but one of those was the war on drugs. And most of you are really young, and you were not alive during the time that Ronald Reagan and Richard Nixon were president. But Richard Nixon started, I think he was kind of the initial president who started the whole concept of the war on drugs, and Ronald Reagan and his wife Nancy really kind of fought to get the war on drugs out into the media, and it was kind of like a big push in our community. We also saw the beginnings of crack cocaine. And some of you will probably almost chuckle when I say crack cocaine was no joke. I don't even think that I could explain how crazy the world was, certainly the United States was, when people were on crack. It was something like I'd never seen before, the amount of violence and craziness in our community. And I really shouldn't say that now in 2020 because our world is pretty stinking crazy right now. But crack was something different. It was a drug that made people, the desperation was a different level. So the communities were freaking out and basically demanding that the government lock these offenders up for forever, for long periods of time. So that's how really it seemed that this war on drugs and these really long sentences for drug offenders started. And it took up until probably, I don't know, probably the 2010-ish, when we finally started saying, we've locked all these people up for the rest of their life, and now our prisons are so overflowing that we don't have any room for these new violent offenders. So trying to figure out different ways to deal with drug offenders is challenging, has been challenging. And most of you probably are pretty much on the same page. If a drug offender doesn't want to stop using drugs, they're probably not going to. So anyways, other things like Prop 47 and AB 109 have had impacts on prison population, and you're going to learn all about that when you do your research papers. But this is kind of hard for me to explain, but you all know what a bell looks like. A bell, it kind of is like an arch, kind of. It's flatter at it goes... what can I make a bell look like? Maybe you can follow my little thingy majiggy right here, whatever this thing's called. A bell would go flat, and then it goes, and then it goes back down a full again. Bell-shaped curve is what it used to look like. We used to have flat age, young people, and then we had a bunch of other people that were all about the same age, and then old people. Most of our offenders were about the same age in prison, is what I'm trying to say. But because of these really long sentences and people living longer and mandatory minimum sentences, we have a lot of really old people in prison right now. We have a lot of really young offenders, and we have a lot of really old offenders. What kind of issues arise when you have a lot of really young and, probably more importantly, really old offenders in prison? They become victimized. Really old offenders, they get really expensive. Think about what happens when you start getting old. I'll tell you, because I'm starting to get old. Your eyes go, your ears go. You start needing like knee surgery. Your health starts going. You get more and more expensive. You get cancer. You get, Alzheimer's. You name it, you become more and more expensive. And it costs more and more money to house. Older people also can be victimized. So there's a lot, you end up with a lot of old offenders in prison. This is another type of offender that you have to figure out, like, how are we going to supervise these people? In California, if you are not a serious violent offender, you are very likely not in our prisons right now, based on AB 109 and Prop 47, and the fact that our prisons are so overcrowded. The vast majority of our offenders are now violent offenders. Men are more likely to be imprisoned for violent offenses than women. That's probably something that you would guess. Female offenders, at the time the book was written, made up about 7% of the United States prison population. That number is higher than it used to be. Recidivism rates, now that means they're reoffending rates are high, but not as high as for men. And you got to think here that women, sorry guys, I'm not trying to be like sexist here, but women usually, when they get out, they're going to go back to their babies, their kids. That might be what would keep them from reoffending, more so than men. Not that men don't go to their kids, I'm just saying. So don't get all offended. I know you men love your babies too. Female inmates, are they more high maintenance? Do they have more issues than men? I'm going to say yes. Okay, again, ladies now, sorry, don't get offended. I would work in a men's prison for twice as long as I would in a women's prison. Women are, in my opinion, about 10 times more difficult to work with because they're about 10 times more needy and difficult to deal with than men. In my opinion, they do have a lot of psychological needs, vocational needs. A lot of them have never worked before. They have parenting issues. So do men probably, but I think women typically end up being the primary caregiver for children. And then they have all kinds of other health needs, life skills needs, domestic violence issues. So female offenders, even as a probation officer, having a girl on my caseload as opposed to a boy, I would have taken 20 boys to one girl, because the girls were so much more difficult. Is that bad? I'm sorry. Please don't be offended, ladies, because I'm not trying to offend anyone, but it's 100% true in my opinion. And a lot of times, if you've taken my juvenile delinquency class, we talk about what girls go through typically to become delinquent or criminal. A lot of times they've gone through a lot of abuse and sexual, physical, mental, you name it, before they became criminals. Something which boys don't always go through. So it's kind of, anyways, about 62% of women in prison have children compared to about 42% of men. Most children of female offenders are going to live with grandma, right? While the remainder go to foster care. When men are imprisoned, their kids live with a mom, right? Does that make sense? Guy goes to prison. Who does the baby live with? The baby lives with his mom or her mom. Mom goes to prison. The baby's living with grandma, right? So you hear what I'm saying there. So it's tough. It's extra, it gets really challenging because, yeah, the baby, the separation from the parents. So prisons do have parenting programs. Most of them do, especially for on the women's side, but the men's side typically do as well. Some will allow for visitation. They try and make it like a family-friendly visitation room to try and make it somewhat normal for the kids. And some prisons will even have, will allow a mother to give birth, like go to the hospital, have the baby, and let the baby live in the prison with the mom for the first year, which is really interesting. But once the baby's about a year old and they think the baby might have memories, they will make the baby move. But they want to have that first year for the baby to be able to bond with the mother. But parenting programs, certainly for women, really, I mean, it's important for both, but they also have some programs, I believe, Oregon, Washington, Girl Scouts behind bars. So this is a program where they have Girl Scout troops, and they are specifically for young girls, well, Girl Scout age girls, whose mothers are in prison. And so their troop, all the girls have moms in prison, typically in the same prison. And the girls do all the same things that Girl Scouts do. They, sell cookies. They do earn their badges, whatever Girl Scouts do. And what they typically will work toward is a trip to the prison to get to go visit with their moms. So when the Girl Scouts get together, they all have this thing in common, and that is that their moms are in prison. So when they go to the Girl Scout meeting, they don't have to be embarrassed, when they're like, oh, Janie, where's your mommy? Well, my mommy's in prison. They don't have to worry about that because all their mommies are in prison. So it's a good program. Number one, it's Girl Scouts. And I think most people would agree that for the most part, I think Girl Scouts is probably a good program. And secondly, they get to feel kind of normal, which is probably something that you don't really feel when you are, in elementary school and it's, muffins with mom day and everybody's like, well, where's your mom? Well, my mom's in prison. So anyways, Girl Scouts behind bars. If you get a chance, Google it on, not Google it, look on YouTube. There's a couple of videos and stuff. I think they're kind of old, but it's kind of interesting. And you get to see the kids and the moms and they're all happy and blah, blah, blah. So anyways, and it also kind of helps the moms because it encourages the moms to behave so they get a chance to see their kids. So other needs of female inmates: substance abuse treatment, medical care, psychological services, educational and vocational services. These are all things that I think a lot of times women miss out on when they're on the streets. and they could use all those services while they are in custody. And there were a couple of specific issues regarding women in the prison system. 1974, there was a case where the courts decided women were not being provided with enough services in prison. And honestly, this is still true today. There aren't as many women in prison. So it's understandable. I'm not saying it's right, but it's understandable that not as much money is spent on programs for women because there aren't as many women in prison. When 93% of your prisoners are men, it's almost understandable that you're not going to spend as much money on women's programs as you would on men's. Again, I'm not saying it's right, but again, you can kind of understand. So it's sort of frustrating. And then in 1995, not offering equal services for women as men is not necessarily a violation of equal protection. Number of inmates, security level, crimes committed by inmates, length of sentence, special circumstances. They had to explain the discrepancy. So the courts kind of backed off a little bit in 1995, saying we can kind of understand why you don't have as many services for women. It sucks, but it's kind of, again, it's sort of understandable. Even, again, Fresno County Probation, when I worked there, we had this amazing, I thought it was amazing, boot camp program for our boys, Elkhorn Correctional Facility Boot Camp. And I thought it was just an awesome program, but we had nothing for girls. Nothing. They could do a commitment in juvenile hall and that was it. So it's very common because we didn't have that many girls, so it kind of made sense. So I think this is the last slide. Yes, we made it.